Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. It's good to see you, Daniel.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Very good. We had good news this week. A good friend of ours won his election, Walter Jones, congressman from North Carolina, who's been a champion of non-interventionist foreign policy and cutting all that spending in ways, and has come out to be one of the strongest anti-war members of Congress right now. So he has defied a lot of conventional wisdom. So his race was supposed to be real close. At this individual's Taylor Griffin, who ran against him 2 years ago, was only six percentage points away from Walter in his own primary. So people were worried. And guess what happened this year? They were convinced they were going to wipe Walter out. And guess who his enemies were? The neocons.
No.
The neocons came in, spent a few dollars, and they didn't do so well.
No, Walter Jones increased his margin of victory by a significant amount. As you point out, last time he was challenged by Griffin, he only won by 6%. This time, Jones got 65% to Griffin's 14%.
Oh, boy.
So 50 points.
Yes. Now, that tells us something because, Walter is an interesting person. I think a lot of people know his history about how he switched. And he was pro-war, voted for the Iraq War. And then when he found out that the executive branch, the president and others lied to him about the danger of Saddam Hussein, once he realized that they had lied to him, he was pretty unforgiving about it. And he's not very pleased. And he almost is feeling that he needed to do penance, which he does probably more than he needs to, but he is really, really remorseful in the fact that he ever endorsed this war. So he's really dedicated to the peace issue. And but sometimes you can tell more about an individual by their enemies. Mm-hmm. But there were a few rather well-known people who were ganging up on Walter.
Griffin should have been worried, actually, when Bill Kristol got behind him.
Yeah, there you go.
Because whatever Kristol touches seems to turn to dirt. Whatever he predicts will happen, you can almost guarantee it won't happen. So Kristol got behind him, and he got the neocon machine in Washington behind him. He even got some other people that to back Griffin, and of course it backfired and really embarrassed them, and we weren't surprised, but
Karl Rove joined
right.
in, and Governor Barber joined in, but also, which was a little bit unusual, or maybe slightly unsuspecting, but I guess not so, is Sarah Palin was influenced by Kristol to go in and endorse Griffin.
Well, when Palin was the vice presidential candidate under McCain, she went to the Bill Kristol University of Foreign Policy. So Kristol taught her everything she needed. So I'm sure they imposed on Palin, look, this is a horrible Walter Jones. He doesn't care about the troops. He doesn't want war. You got to endorse his opponent. I'm sure that's what happened.
See, the conventional wisdom has always been, they used it against me, and you were around when they were doing this. Oh, I don't vote for any of this money. I vote against the war. And for some reason, they thought that was, anti-military, anti-troops, and anti-American, and for a weak defense. And people have been intimidated by the propaganda of the military-industrial complex, and therefore they say, whatever you want, we'll do this. But it looks like maybe attitudes are shifting, and it reminds me of another colleague who actually voted against the war. I think he's the only Republican still in the Congress that voted against it. There were only 6 of us that voted against the Iraq War, and that's.
Weather down here.
Yeah. Well, we don't need any more water, I'll tell you. I'll tell you that. So Jimmy Duncan, from Tennessee, voted against it, and he has a strong military district, and he said it was probably the most dangerous vote he ever took, and got a lot of grief. Now he says it turned out to be his best vote ever in the Congress.
And I know that you're delighted, and I'm delighted, but that both Mr. Jones and Mr. Duncan are board members of your Institute for Peace and Prosperity. So we've enjoyed working with them over the years too.
Well, I also had a personal experience ongoing with this position before I even ran for the presidency in 2008 or in 2012. It was brought up in the district, and it was something that was ongoing, but they would superficially always say, it's un-American not to support the troops. But it turned out that it was it never turned out to be a negative. Especially, money talks too, and the donations that our campaign got from the military shows that there's a different sentiment. Sometimes you can take a position on principle and not know exactly, it might be perceived that that's a dangerous thing to do, but really the people are further along on the issue. I think of that on the drug war too. Sure. I used to think, how am I ever going to survive taking this position on the drug war? It turned out that right now, most of the people are saying there's something terrible about the drug war. So that's the way I think the shift is. But I think that Walter especially has taken this as a moral position, that it's wrong and the killing is wrong. I think it's a very healthy attitude. And he gets very, very annoyed when nobody's ever sorry. Yeah. Even with mistakes, 10,000 Americans could die, and it was just bad policy. That absolutely not. They have no conscience. They show no shame whatsoever. They just say, well, like Madeleine Albright, well, that's the price you have to pay. Yeah. 500,000 kids in Iraq die with our policy, but what can we do about it? We're God's gift, and we're spreading American exceptionalism.
And you said earlier, they always try to say that you were not supporting the troops, but the troops voted with their money, and my guess is that these troops are not independently wealthy people, but when it came time for you to run, they gave you more donations than the other Republicans combined. So it doesn't matter. The troops voted for you, is what they did. But and one of the reasons we're talking about Walter Jones is we just finished doing an extensive interview with him, which we'll be posting very soon. We're editing it right now, but we wanted to talk about maybe some of the things that we couldn't talk about, which is the race and this sort of thing. But if you don't mind, I'd like to read a wonderful quote from Walter, and this was just in one of the articles about his recent election, and I think it just beautifully sums up our view of foreign policy too in such a nice, simple way. He said, "We need a foreign policy that makes sense. We cannot continue to try and change these countries. It's not working." Perfect. It doesn't work.
Yeah, but that argument won't work either. It's too logical.
That's true.
And we don't have enough people that are logical up there. But we still live in a country, and people's opinions are, pretty important. And, one point I made to Walter is that as soon as we change public opinion, but he pointed out a very important thing. He says, yes, but the public opinion of those people who work in the military-industrial complex, they have an influence too. Yeah. It may be wrong, but so there is an influence, and the ideas and special interests are a reflection of what the people do, and they can influence Congress. So, and that's why the money keeps spending. But I know Walter's very concerned about the spending and the debt and all, and of course we talk about it all the time. So when the time comes that we cannot live beyond our means as we are right now, and we have to tighten our belts and live differently, the military spending, the war spending has to cease. Not because there'll be a logic to it, there's not that much logic, but because of a necessity. We won't be able to maintain the empire, and that's of course how most empires come down. They don't come down by invasions. We didn't invade the Soviet system. Empires fall for economic reasons, and that's why it's connected. And that's one thing I like about the Institute for Peace and Prosperity, although that is designed to talk about foreign policy. You can't talk about foreign policy without recognizing that there's a monetary policy there, because we can't tax the people enough. So how do you finance war? As they have throughout the centuries. They either steal the gold or they print the money, and in both ways end badly.
And the thing to remember is we're not pacifists. We believe in defending ourselves. And the point that you made is apropos. There will come a time where we cannot maintain the empire. And the people that are pushing this empire are pushing us toward that time. But it'll also be the case that when we reach the point where we can no longer maintain the empire, we also will not be able to defend ourselves. And so they're the ones making us vulnerable.
That's right, and it's a national security issue. Every once in a while you do hear people talk on TV and say, well, the economy is a national security issue. It is. They might not interpret it exactly the way we are, because they're not always the people who want to cut the military. They probably want to cut something domestic, because the military is the ultimate protection of our liberties, which is absolutely false. Because if you think of the last 15 years, years, our freedoms have been under threat, but it hasn't been under threat by an invasion of individuals who come and run, the legislative branch or the judicial branch or the executive branch. It's people that come, it's the government that we have now who decide that we need the Patriot Act and we need NSA surveillance and all these intrusions and the executive branch devising these no-knock spying on us and hit and kill this and all these tremendous violations. So yes, our liberties are being threatened, but internally I think much more so than any external threat.
And our viewers will be able to watch the Jones interview again very soon. One thing, finally, I'd like to say that impressed me from talking to him, it made me feel very happy, is he said that your old Liberty Caucus is alive and well and actually growing. So that's a bit of really good news for us.
Good, and of course, I think ideas are the key to all this, and we want to get people to talk about the ideology of what our foreign policy is all about, as well as our economic policy. But unfortunately, we don't have more members like Walter Jones in Washington, and there were very, very few that I knew that actually thought things through, would ask serious questions and change their minds philosophically. Everything is with antennas up, listening to the chatter, and many times that the chatter is not accurate on what the people are actually saying. They're listening to the chatter of those who are the lobbyists, trying to direct all this attention. But I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.